As the world's leading independent branded business valuation and strategy consultancy with a presence in over 20 locations worldwide, it is worth it for companies and rugby teams alike to take advice from CEO David Haigh, who is also the founder of Brand Finance based in London. David, I know you are an exceptionally busy person, and so the Rugby Business Network appreciates you taking the time to speak with us.
Never too busy to speak to you.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, David, for those that may not be entirely familiar with Brand Finance, please could you let our listeners know when you founded your company and what do you do as a business?
Sure. I qualified as a chartered accountant with Pricewaterhouse, and I went into financial management and was finance director of a number of companies, latterly advertising agencies. I got very interested in marketing and branding, and in 1996, I set up Brand Finance as a dedicated brand valuation and metrics firm. We now have our head office in London, in the city of London. We have about 40 staff in London, and we now have a number of subsidiaries dotted around the world. One is actually in Johannesburg. We have a good team down there. And most of our subsidiaries are in old Commonwealth countries. And then we have a network of partners and agents around the world. So we're represented in about 25 to 30 countries.
And in 2004, the Brand Finance Institute was established. What is the purpose of this institute?
Well, we found that most clients didn't really understand a lot about what we did. And we got slightly tired of spending our whole life explaining in meetings for an hour or so exactly how it worked. So we created a slightly more structured training program. So clients that want to send their staff or would like to know more about the nitty-gritty of what we do, we're very happy to run seminars, training programs, workshops to explain the details.
All right.
And that's what the Brand Finance Institute is really there to do, and as a centre of excellence for research and so on.
Brilliant. Well, David, as you mentioned, before you created Brand Finance, you qualified as a chartered accountant. Tell us what you did along the way that led you down the path to forming your business a little over 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, as I said, I qualified with PwC. I was there for 5 years. I was then finance director, first of all, of a specialty chemical company and then of a concrete company, quite far removed from branding. I moved across and became finance director of an innovation and design firm and then 2 different advertising agencies. And following that, I became managing director of one division of a company called Publicis, which is a very big advertising agency from France. I ran a thing called Publicis Dialogue in London for 5 years. During that period, I wrote a book about strategic marketing, and at the end of the period, I was invited to join Interbrand as global head of their brand valuation unit, which I did for about 18 months before deciding, well, there's room in the market for another, and that's when I set up Brand Finance.
That's wonderful. Well, not all brands are the same, and therefore not are all worth the same, as you will quite know, David. Can you tell us the method you follow in determining the value of a brand, and is it a difficult process?
Well, the way that we actually do it is we are looking to try and understand what is the future revenue that is specifically attached to having that brand. If you, for example, just created a name, no one would pay you anything extra, no one would buy more of your products, there would be no more loyalty. You have to build emotional empathy and recognition and awareness and preference into a name and into a set of intellectual property that surrounds it. So, designs, logos, websites, and so on. So what we're trying to find out is what is the reservoir of brand equity behind that package of intellectual property, and what is the current income that could be attributed to it, and what is the future income that could be attributed to it. So we're looking for the income. And typically we would create a business valuation model of the subject business and say, how much better is that business doing because it's got a strong brand than if it didn't have a strong brand? So, does it get a price premium? Does it get a market share advantage? Does it get lower cost of capital, and so on? So if you're a business valuer, it's not that complicated, but most people are not business valuers, so it's a little complicated, but we actually try and make it easy for clients and others to understand. The principles are simple, but some of the calculations and so on get a bit involved.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating. Well, David, apart from having a multitude of your articles and interviews published on brand valuation, you have also added your voice on the topic at the Brand Exchange in London. Can you tell us a bit about this club and your involvement?
Yeah, sure. Well, about 5 years ago, we were ejected from our office in the city, in the West End of London, because the Crown Estate was knocking our building down. So we were looking around for a new location for our company, and we were offered an old bank building directly opposite the Royal Exchange and the Bank of England in London, 6 floors, and we only needed 3 of them, so we scratched our head and decided it would be fun to create a club in the building for our clients. So we created the Brand Exchange Club. Brand Finance is in the top 3 floors of the building. The Brand Exchange Club is in the bottom 3 floors. And we invite all clients, past clients, alumni, and interested parties to join the club. And we run a whole series of events explaining and trying to illustrate the things that we stand for. So the strapline of the club is where brands meet finance. And so we have academics, entrepreneurs and gurus coming in and talking about their books and their case studies. And it's a very jolly atmosphere to kind of understand the issues.
Absolutely. Sounds fantastic. Well, David, simple question. What would you say is the most important thing for a business to consider when developing a brand?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to have what they call USP, unique selling proposition. You've got to have a good, strong proposition, and you've got to know what it is. Nowadays, there's lots of terminology around, like you've got to have a purpose, you've got to have a vision, you've got to have whatever. But whatever it is, you've got to be unique. Once you know that you are unique, you then have to create a set of legal rights that you can defend. So in the context of rugby, many rugby clubs over the years have been quite loosey-goosey about the way that they protect and defend their IP. So if you take clubs like Saracens and Harlequins in London, they've been very remiss over the years about not registering their trademarks, not protecting their IP, and of late they have been getting into the business of protecting it. You know, similarly with teams like the Lions or the All Blacks or the Wallabies or whatever, they are all now waking up to the fact that they need to have strong and well-protected legal rights globally. So first of all, you have the USP. Secondly, you've got to have strong legal rights. And then you can get into the business of putting value into those rights.
David, you just touched on the All Blacks there. That's my next question. They're probably the leading brand in rugby across the globe at the moment. What value would you put on their brand even after the drawn series against the British and Irish Lions?
Yeah, well, we have actually valued their brand twice. We every now and again we value brands that are of great interest to us, and we just do it speculatively. I think the last time we valued it at about 190 million US dollars, about 250 million Kiwi dollars, and we hypothesized at the time, this was just before the Rugby World Cup, and we hypothesized that if they continued the way they were continuing, opening up America, becoming a very strong global brand, that in the not too distant future they ought to be worth 500 million US dollars, and I definitely think that's the case. If you compare them with a brand like Manchester United, Manchester United has something like 18 or 19 lead sponsors in a whole range of different categories, whereas the All Blacks still only have 3. They are becoming a lot more commercially minded, and I'm sure that will increase. And that's where the monetization comes from. And I think the key thing about the All Blacks is, although it was a drawn series, it's quite clear how good they are, and the whole way that they manage their brand is very disciplined, and they're increasingly well known in the whole world, but in particular America, which is where huge rugby growth is happening.
That is incredible. What would you say are some of the other leading rugby brands in the world right now? Not just teams, but also products and services and rugby-related businesses and organizations.
Yes, well, I mean, I haven't got a comprehensive list, but the ones that spring to mind are the ones that are quite visible, you know, like Gilbert in the ball context, Rhino Rugby in the context of equipment, Under Armour, they've been trying very hard to get into the business, Canterbury. So there's a lot of those kind of products and services that go into the thing. There are 1 or 2 that have diversified into clothing, like Eden Park, Cotton Traders. So jumping in on the bandwagon of rugby to that target audience. But then, you know, the real brands are the team brands. You know, the ones we've been talking about, like the All Blacks and Saracens and people like that. That's where the real money lies. And increasingly, that is where the media money is going to lie, because rugby is a fantastic visual sport, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, it makes sense that if a rugby team, be it a club or country, does not perform, then the value of their brand could be affected. Although in reversing that, is it possible for a brand to affect the performance of the players within a team?
Yeah, I mean, clearly. I mean, now, one of the areas that we have worked in for a long time is football, soccer in particular, and you look at the Premier League. Now, if you look at Manchester United, we have consistently valued them as, if not the most valuable soccer brand, one of the top 2 or 3, even at a point over the last 5 or 6 years where their performance has been very poor. And, so the fact that they had a strong brand and a strong fan base and a strong ethos and a strong proposition has carried them through a period of very weak, volatile, performance. And so this is one of the things about brands. Where you have a strong brand, they are like a sort of counterbalance. So your performance is poor, but the brand carries you through till the point where you recover. That is clearly the case with a brand like Man U. And it's a good lesson to learn for most teams, because all teams go through periods of bad performance.
Most definitely. Well, David, more and more professional athletes are marketing themselves as a brand these days, such as Usain Bolt, Tiger Woods and Roger Federer. What do you think about individual professional rugby players wanting to become a brand, considering that rugby is a team sport, while the athletes I mentioned are involved in athletics, golf and tennis, which are sports that are focused on the individual?
I mean, I think rugby guys and girls tend to be more modest about themselves, I think. There's a kind of an anti-feeling where individual players get up and try and turn themselves into brands, which is not the case in soccer or cricket or some of those other sports. If you take golf or tennis, they tend to be very individual sports, so they lend themselves to individual brands. Whereas in team sports, it's not quite the same. And in rugby, I think there's definitely a kind of culture against it. Having said that, I think there are certain players who, because of their longevity and because of their performance, definitely could, and in their own interest, probably should create brands. The one that immediately springs to my mind, actually, is Johnny Wilkinson, who was very famous years ago in the Aussie tour, and for a period it looked as though he could create a brand, certainly in the UK. He didn't make a great job of it, it has to be said. I think one of the problems was that he actually launched a brand, I can't even remember the name of it now, but it wasn't his name. I think in this sort of thing, it's like Fred Perry. You have to have an eponymous name to your brand, like the David Beckham brand. And if you manage it the right way and you're quite modest, but you put it on against the right things, it can become a very valuable proposition and well worth doing.
Well, staying on the topic of individual sportsmen and women, is it possible for an individual within a rugby team to affect the brand of the club as a whole, whether it be a positive or a negative influence?
Yes. Go back to football. Like look at someone like Ronaldo or someone like David Beckham. When they turn up at a team, it has a dramatic effect on everyone's perceptions of those teams. And I think rugby is really catching up with the slightly more financially sophisticated, higher audience sports. So definitely, if you get the right person, and clearly, I mean, in a way, we're talking about it in branding terms, but in the old days, people would have just said, well, if you have a great captain or great players, it is going to affect people's perceptions of that team. Nowadays, we just talk about it in slightly more modernistic branding terms, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, David, we know that professional rugby players possess certain skills and traits that make them ideal candidates to work in the business environment after they retire. Although, would you say that they have what it takes to work at a branded business valuation and strategy consultancy like Brand Finance?
Well, absolutely. And Brand Finance over the years has recruited a lot of ex-rugby players.
Wow.
Frequently they have injuries and they have to stop playing. So, to my knowledge, we've had 2 guys who buggered their knees up playing rugby and ended up working in IT or valuation for Brand Finance, and we were very pleased to have them. They're nearly always highly intelligent, amusing, sociable, fun people to have around. You can depend on them. So, it's like ex-army guys going into the city. You know, they have all the right characteristics, and definitely that's the case with rugby.
Brilliant. Well, David, it has been fascinating to see the links that exist between the value of a brand and rugby teams and players. It's an incredible pleasure for the Rugby Business Network to have had the opportunity to speak with you, and we wish you success and continued growth at Brand Finance.
Thanks a lot.